A millionaire goes undercover at his hotel and discovers a housekeeper who changes everything. Welcome to Heart Story HQ. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. On an ordinary day in a luxury hotel, a place of marble floors, shimmering chandeliers, and impeccable service, one man checked in under a false name. To everyone else, he was just another guest. To him, this was the first step in uncovering a truth he couldn't see from his towering office. He wasn't just here to enjoy the plush suites or savor the chef's tasting menu. He was here to see the invisible, to listen to the unheard. Disguised as an ordinary guest, the owner of this grand empire came searching for something far more valuable than wealth. What he found was a story that would challenge everything he believed about success, humanity, and the power of a single act of kindness. Amid the quiet strength of a housekeeper, the resilience of someone who worked tirelessly without recognition, he uncovered a truth that would change his life forever. What could a housekeeper with her world of unnoticed sacrifices possibly teach a millionaire? And how could her kindness ripple through the lives of everyone around her? This is a story about connection, compassion, and the extraordinary power of kindness. And it all starts here. In a towering penthouse overlooking the city skyline, a man sat alone, staring out at the sea of lights below. The world knew him as a visionary, a millionaire hotelier who had built an empire from nothing. His name, synonymous with luxury, adorned properties across continents. Yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. For all his success, he felt an unfamiliar emptiness creeping in, a quiet unease that came from realizing just how far he had drifted from the foundation of his empire, the people who made it all possible. On the sleek coffee table before him, a folder sat open. Inside were reports, declining employee satisfaction surveys, anonymous complaints about working conditions, and a disconcerting note from a loyal manager. The note read simply, "We're losing something money can't fix." He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. The numbers and words felt cold, detached. They didn't tell him the why. What was really happening in the hotels that bore his name? He had trusted others to oversee the day-to-day, but now doubt lingered like a shadow. For years, he had prided himself on understanding every aspect of his business. But as he gazed at the papers, he realized how far removed he'd become. He knew the marble finishes, the curated art pieces, the perfectly folded towels, but not the people who cleaned, served, and smiled through it all. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, his reflection in the glass window staring back at him. His life was one of luxury, but was it truly fulfilling? He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to an employee who wasn't an executive. When had he last walked the halls of one of his hotels as anything other than the owner? And so the idea was born. He would go undercover. No cameras, no assistants, no fanfare. Just him, a regular man, blending into the very world he had created. His team protested when he told them. They reminded him of his packed schedule, his public image, the risks of being unrecognized. But he wouldn't be swayed. This was personal. He needed to see for himself, to step out of the penthouse and into the lives of the people he had always trusted to carry his vision. With a small suitcase and a fake name, he booked a room in one of his flagship hotels. For the first time in years, he would experience life not as a millionaire, but as an ordinary guest. The hotel was a masterpiece of design and sophistication, an oasis in the heart of the bustling city. Guests walked through its grand revolving doors, greeted by a symphony of elegance, soft piano music, the faint scent of jasmine, and the quiet hum of professionalism. In the lobby, the marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's warm glow. Bellhops moved seamlessly, their uniforms pristine. Guests chatted over champagne in the lounge, their laughter mingling with the gentle clink of glasses. It was everything the brochures promised: luxury, comfort, perfection. But beyond the lobby, behind the heavy doors marked "Staff Only," was a different world. A world of hurried footsteps, whispered instructions, and the faint echo of clattering dishes. Here, employees moved with precision and urgency, their faces a blend of focus and fatigue. This was the world he had come to see, not the polished floors or curated experiences, but the effort it took to maintain them. Among the staff was Maria, a housekeeper who had worked at the hotel for nearly a decade. She wasn't the loudest or the most outspoken, but she was the kind of person everyone noticed. because she cared. Her days started long before sunrise. After waking her 8-year-old son, she would prepare breakfast, leave instructions for her elderly neighbor who watched him while she worked, and take the early bus to the hotel. Maria was known for her meticulous attention to detail. She remembered which guests preferred extra pillows, which rooms needed special touches, and which colleagues needed a word of encouragement on a tough day. To her coworkers, she was a source of quiet strength. To management, she was dependable, but her life wasn't easy. At home, she juggled medical bills for her son who had asthma and overdue rent notices. She worked double shifts whenever she could, sacrificing her own comfort to keep her small family afloat. And yet, despite the weight of her responsibilities, Maria never let it show. She greeted each day and each guest with a smile, believing that her work mattered, even if no one ever said so. The millionaire entered the hotel lobby with an air of cautious curiosity. The familiar grandeur surrounded him, the glistening chandeliers, the soft murmur of well-dressed guests, the polished murmur of floors. Yet, for the first time, he wasn't the owner of it all. Today, he was simply James Foster, a middle-class traveler. He chose a standard room, avoiding the suites that bore his usual level of comfort. No one batted an eye as he checked in at the front desk, his name scrawled on a simple booking form. The first thing he noticed was the staff. They moved with quiet precision, smiles etched on their faces. But as he looked closer, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The subtle signs of fatigue. A bellhop discreetly wiped his brow. A receptionist stole a fleeting glance at the clock. Behind the perfection was something he hadn't truly understood until now. When he reached his room, he paused to take in the details. The bed was perfectly made, the towels folded with crisp precision. A complimentary note rested on the desk welcoming him to the hotel. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling deeply. He was here to see more than just the surface. He was here to understand the stories that played out behind these pristine walls. It was early the next morning when he first encountered Maria. He had stepped into the hallway to retrieve a newspaper from the cart outside his door. Maria was there, pushing her cleaning cart quietly down the corridor. She wore a neatly pressed uniform, her hair tied back in a simple braid. Despite the early hour, she greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. "I hope you had a restful night." He nodded, momentarily caught off guard. "Yes, thank you. It was very comfortable." As she moved on, he couldn't help but notice the quiet grace with which she worked. She knocked softly on doors, her voice always polite and calm as she announced herself to guests. Later that day, he saw her again in the lobby. This time, she was assisting an elderly couple. The woman struggled to maneuver her walker while her husband juggled 2 suitcases. Maria stepped in immediately, offering her arm for support. "Take your time," she said kindly. "I'll carry these for you." She didn't stop until the couple was safely settled into their room. The millionaire, watching from a distance, felt a flicker of admiration. Maria wasn't just doing her job. She was going above and beyond in ways that few people noticed. Over the next few days, the millionaire began to notice more. Maria's presence was subtle yet impactful. One morning, as he sat in the hotel lounge, he saw her helping a young mother whose baby was crying uncontrollably. The mother looked frazzled, her face flushed with embarrassment. Maria approached with a gentle smile. "It's okay, ma'am. Would you like me to warm up a bottle for the baby?" The mother nodded, her relief visible. Moments later, Maria returned with a warm bottle and a small stuffed toy she'd found in the lost and found. The baby stopped crying, and the mother's gratitude was palpable. Another time, he saw her in the staff corridor, consoling a young trainee who had spilled a tray of drinks during a breakfast rush. Maria crouched beside her, helping to clean the mess. "It happens to all of us," she said softly. "The important thing is to keep going. You're doing great." The trainee smiled weakly, her hand still trembling, but Maria's calm demeanor seemed to steady her. Each interaction painted a clearer picture of who Maria was. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a source of quiet strength, a person who carried more than her share of the weight without complaint. When Maria's shift ended, she didn't go out to dinner or relax in front of the TV like many of the guests she served. Instead, she boarded a crowded bus, the city lights blurring past her window as exhaustion settled in. At her small apartment, her 8-year-old son Lucas was waiting. He greeted her at the door with a smile that made the long day feel a little lighter. "Hi, Mom," he said excitedly. "Mrs. Roberts said I'm doing really well in math." Maria hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." But the joy was short-lived. As Lucas spoke about his day, Maria noticed the faint wheeze in his breath, a subtle reminder of his asthma. Later that evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Maria sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills. The rent was overdue, the utilities were behind, and Lucas's prescription for his inhaler needed to be refilled. The washing machine had broken the week before, and the repair costs were far beyond what she could afford. Maria buried her face in her hands, whispering a prayer for strength. She didn't know how she would manage, but she resolved to keep going. For Lucas, back at the hotel, Maria's days weren't without their challenges. One morning, during the peak of a busy checkout rush, her supervisor confronted her in the hallway. "Maria," he said sharply, holding up a sheet. "This wasn't folded properly. Do I need to remind you of our standards?" Maria looked at the sheet, instantly recognizing it as the work of a new trainee. But instead of defending herself, she nodded calmly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll fix it right away." She smoothed the sheet, adjusted the pillows, and ensured the room was perfect before moving on. The millionaire standing nearby clenched his fists. He had seen the entire interaction. He wanted to step in, to defend her, but he stayed quiet. He wanted to understand more before revealing himself, the millionaire's growing curiosity. As the days passed, the millionaire couldn't shake the impression Maria had left on him. He began to ask discreet questions. In conversations with other staff, he mentioned her name casually. "Maria? She's amazing," one colleague said. "She's always there to help, even when she doesn't have to be." Another added, "She works harder than anyone I know, and she's always so kind. She's the kind of person who makes you believe in good people again." The more he learned, the more he realized how vital Maria was, not just to the hotel, but to everyone around her. Then, one evening, as he passed the staff break room, he overheard Maria talking to a coworker. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," she said softly. "The hours, the stress, I barely see Lucas anymore, but I can't quit. He depends on me. I just wish it wasn't so hard." The millionaire froze, her words echoing in his mind. He felt a pang of guilt. This was his hotel, his staff, his responsibility. In that moment, he knew he couldn't remain silent much longer. Maria's story deserved to be acknowledged, her sacrifices recognized, and he was the only one who could make it happen. After days of observing Maria, listening to her, and hearing the heartfelt stories her colleagues shared about her, the millionaire found himself wide awake in the stillness of the night. The modest hotel room, stripped of the luxury he was accustomed to, felt stifling. He tossed and turned, unable to quiet his thoughts, as the events of the past week replayed in his mind like a reel on repeat. He thought of Maria's tired yet unwavering smile, her soft-spoken words of encouragement to a nervous trainee, the gentle way she interacted with every guest, and the countless moments she went out of her way to make someone else's day a little brighter. These weren't grand gestures, but small acts of kindness that carried extraordinary weight. And yet, Maria had no idea how remarkable she truly was. He turned to the reports he had brought with him, the ones that had initially prompted this undercover visit. The pages were filled with stark numbers and cold facts. Complaints about employee morale, anonymous concerns about burnout, and warnings about the cracks forming in the foundation of his business. But now, those reports felt incomplete, even shallow. Those faceless statistics now had names and stories attached to them. The bellhop who worked double shifts to support his aging parents, the cook who dreamed of opening his own restaurant but couldn't save enough, and Maria, the housekeeper who quietly bore the weight of the world on her shoulders without ever asking for recognition. The weight of it all pressed down on him, heavier than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Success, he realized, wasn't just about profits, growth, or expansion. It was about the people who made that success possible. People like Maria, who gave everything they had while remaining invisible to the world. As he gazed out the window at the city lights flickering like distant stars, a sense of urgency washed over him. He couldn't keep watching silently. He couldn't let another day go by without acting. He sat up in bed, grabbed a notebook, and began sketching out a plan. Tomorrow, he decided, would be the day. He would reveal his identity, not to bask in the attention, but to show Maria and the entire staff that their sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. It was time to rewrite the story of his empire, starting with the people who had built it from the ground up. The next morning began as quietly as any other in Maria's life. Her alarm buzzed softly at 4:30 a.m., and she reached over to silence it before it could wake Lucas. She moved through her small apartment with practiced ease, careful not to disturb her sleeping son. In the dim light of the kitchen, she prepared a simple breakfast of toast and tea. She wrote a note for her elderly neighbor who had become an invaluable part of her life, watching Lucas after school when her shifts ran late. Beside the note, she placed a small stack of crumpled bills she had managed to save for groceries. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Maria paused for a moment, leaning against the counter, as a wave of exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself. She glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away, and she couldn't afford to be late. She returned to Lucas's room, kissed him gently on the forehead, and whispered, "I'll see you tonight, my love." By the time she arrived at the hotel, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the building's sleek facade. Inside, Maria fell into her usual rhythm, knocking softly on doors, exchanging polite smiles with guests, and ensuring every detail was perfect. But as the morning wore on, something began to feel off. Her colleagues were acting unusually. She noticed them whispering in small groups, sneaking glances her way. There was a buzz of excitement in the air, and Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was at the center of it. Finally, her supervisor approached her. The stern expression she had grown used to over the years was replaced with something softer, almost nervous. "Maria," he said, clearing his throat, "you're needed in the main conference room. There's a meeting." Maria froze, her brow furrowed in confusion. "A meeting? Why would I need to be there?" The supervisor offered her a small, almost sheepish smile. "You'll understand when you get there." Maria nodded slowly, her heart beginning to race. She quickly finished the room she was working on, smoothed her uniform, and made her way toward the conference room. The walk to the conference room felt like an eternity. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, her nerves growing with every step. The staff corridors, usually bustling with activity, seemed quieter than usual, as though the entire hotel was holding its breath. As she passed her coworkers, they gave her encouraging nods and whispered words of support. "You'll be amazing," one of them said with a warm smile. Another reached out to squeeze her hand gently as she passed. Maria's mind raced. What was happening? Why was she being called to a meeting in the grand conference room, a space usually reserved for executives and VIP events? She couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen, but she had no idea what. When she finally reached the heavy wooden doors of the conference room, she paused. Her palms were damp and her breath came in shallow bursts. She took a moment to smooth her uniform, willing her hands to stop trembling. With a deep breath, she pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room was vast and bathed in sunlight, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. Rows of chairs were filled with staff from every department: bellhops, front desk clerks, cooks, and maintenance workers. They all turned to look at her as she entered, their expressions a mix of warmth and anticipation. And there, at the front of the room, stood the man she had come to know as James Foster. But now, he was different. Gone were the casual clothes and the air of quiet anonymity. He wore a tailored suit, his posture exuding confidence and authority. His expression, however, was one of warmth and sincerity. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a guest. This was the owner of the hotel, the man whose name was etched on the plaques and awards displayed in the lobby. Maria stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the moment. The murmurs of her coworkers filled the room, but she barely heard them. All she could focus on was the man before her, the man she thought was just another guest, now revealed to be so much more. And then he smiled, a small but genuine smile that seemed to carry the weight of everything he was about to say. "Maria," he said softly, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Thank you for coming." The room grew silent, the air charged with anticipation as the millionaire stepped forward. He paused at the center of the room, his gaze sweeping across the assembled staff. His eyes lingered on each face: the bellhop who had carried his bags with a tired but genuine smile, the receptionist who had greeted him every morning with warmth, the cooks, the cleaners, the maintenance workers. These were yet too often remained unseen and unheard. Finally, his eyes landed on Maria, who sat near the back, her hands folded nervously in her lap. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "For the past week, I've had the privilege of living among you, not as your employer, but as an ordinary guest. I wanted to understand the heart of this hotel, to see what makes it truly extraordinary." A murmur ran through the room, a ripple of curiosity and surprise. The staff exchanged glances, some nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. The millionaire continued, his tone softening. "And what I found wasn't in the chandeliers or the marble floors. It wasn't in the luxurious suites or the gourmet meals. What I found was all of you. You are the reason this hotel is what it is. Your dedication, your hard work, your kindness, they are the foundation of everything we do. Without you, none of this would exist." A hushed silence fell over the room as his words sank in. Some staff members sat straighter, their faces a mix of pride and disbelief. Others wiped at their eyes, moved by the rare acknowledgement of their efforts. He took a deep breath, his gaze returning to Maria. His voice grew more personal, more heartfelt. "Maria," he said, gesturing for her to join him at the front of the room, "could you come up here?" Maria froze, her hands trembling. She glanced around nervously, her colleagues smiling and nodding at her, urging her forward. "Go on," one of them whispered. "You deserve this." With hesitant steps, she rose and walked to the front of the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. What was happening? Why was she being singled out? The millionaire smiled warmly as she reached him, his expression filled with genuine admiration. "Over the past week," he began, "I've had the honor of watching you work. I've seen how you go out of your way to help others, your colleagues, our guests, even strangers. I've seen the grace and strength you carry, even in the face of challenges that many of us can't begin to imagine." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back, but they spilled over anyway. She managed a small, shaky smile, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. "Maria," the millionaire continued, his voice soft yet steady, "your kindness and dedication have inspired me deeply, and today I want to show my gratitude, not just to you, but to everyone here." He turned to address the room, his tone growing more resolute. "Effective immediately, all employees will receive a significant pay increase. No one who works this hard should have to struggle to make ends meet. You will also receive full medical coverage for you and your families, so you'll never have to choose between your health and your paycheck." The room erupted into cheers, the sound building like a wave of relief and joy. Staff members hugged each other, some laughing, some crying, their disbelief giving way to pure gratitude. The millionaire waited for the applause to settle before turning back to Maria, his voice softening again. "And for you, Maria, I want to do something more. Your son, Lucas, will have every medical expense covered from now on. You'll never have to worry about his health again. I've also set up a scholarship fund for his education, so he can have every opportunity to succeed." Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her tears flowing freely now. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to thank you." But the millionaire wasn't finished. "You'll also receive a financial grant," he added, "to ensure that you and Lucas have the stability and security you deserve. You'll never have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries again." The room fell silent for a moment, the magnitude of his words sinking in. Then, applause broke out once more, louder and more heartfelt than before. Maria's colleagues surrounded her with hugs and congratulations, their own emotions spilling over. For them, Maria's reward felt personal, a recognition of the quiet sacrifices they all understood so well. The millionaire, his own eyes glistening with tears, took a step closer to Maria. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "This is the least I can do for someone who gives so much without expecting anything in return. You've shown me what true strength and kindness look like, and for that I am forever grateful." Maria turned to face her coworkers, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Finally, she took a deep breath and began, her words shaky but heartfelt. "I never expected anything like this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "All I've ever wanted was to do my best, for my son, for my colleagues, for the guests who stay here. I never thought anyone would notice, but thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Her words were met with thunderous applause. The sound filled every corner of the room, a symphony of support and admiration. One by one, her co-workers came forward, embracing her, whispering words of encouragement and gratitude. "You've earned this," Maria once said, squeezing her hand. Another added, "You inspire all of us every day." In that moment, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years: seen, valued, and truly appreciated. For so long, her life had been a quiet struggle, her sacrifices unnoticed by the world. But now, she stood in a room full of people who understood, who celebrated her, who made her feel like she mattered. In the weeks that followed, the hotel transformed. The changes implemented by the Millionaire reverberated through every department, lifting the spirits of the entire staff. With better pay and full medical coverage, employees worked with renewed energy and pride. For Maria, life changed in ways she had never imagined. With the financial support, she moved Lucas into a comfortable, spacious home in a quiet neighborhood. She no longer had to work double shifts or worry about making ends meet. But more than the material changes, Maria carried with her something even greater: the knowledge that her kindness and sacrifices had not only been noticed, but had inspired change. She began mentoring new staff members, sharing her story to encourage them to believe in their own worth and resilience. For the Millionaire, the experience marked the beginning of a new chapter. He vowed to remain connected to the people who made his empire thrive, ensuring their voices were heard and their efforts recognized. He had come to his hotel seeking answers, but he had found something far more valuable: a renewed sense of purpose and a profound respect for the extraordinary people who made the ordinary extraordinary. The Millionaire sat in his penthouse office several weeks later, staring out at the sprawling city below. The skyline stretched endlessly, a glimmering testament to ambition and progress. But today, the view felt different. Where he once saw towering symbols of his own success, he now saw something more profound: a reminder of the countless lives interconnected within the city's rhythms. It was a mosaic of stories, struggles, and triumphs, many of which he had overlooked in his pursuit of growth and expansion. His thoughts drifted back to that pivotal day in the hotel's conference room, to the moment Maria stood before the assembled staff. He could still see her trembling hands, hear the quiver in her voice as she fought to express her gratitude. The image of her tear-streaked face was etched into his memory, a face that reflected not just her disbelief, but the raw, overwhelming emotion of being truly seen and valued for the first time. He remembered the way her colleagues surrounded her afterward, their applause thundering through the room, their own tears flowing freely. It was a moment of collective recognition, not just for Maria, but for every unseen worker who had quietly given their all without expecting anything in return. That moment had pierced something deep within him, something he hadn't even realized was missing: a connection to the humanity of his enterprise. For years, he had measured his success by the metrics that defined the corporate world: profit margins, occupancy rates, market share, and expansion plans. But Maria's story had upended that perspective, showing him a truth he could no longer ignore. Real success wasn't just about wealth or growth. It was about the lives he touched, the dignity he could provide, and the opportunities he could create for the people who formed the foundation of his empire. He turned away from the window, his mind buzzing with purpose. The sleek office, once a haven of power and control, now felt like a command center for something far greater. He leaned back in his chair, the faint hum of the city below grounding him in the present. Ideas began to take shape, not as abstract goals or distant plans, but as actionable commitments to the people who had made his success possible. The first step had been raising wages and providing benefits at the hotel where he had gone undercover, but that, he realized, was just the beginning. It wasn't enough to improve conditions at a single location. He wanted to redefine what his entire company stood for. Policies were rewritten to prioritize employee well-being over mere cost-cutting. Comprehensive programs were launched to recognize and reward acts of kindness, resilience, and dedication among his employees. He established scholarships for the children of his staff, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't limit their potential. Childcare assistance programs were introduced, allowing working parents to focus on their jobs without the constant worry of balancing work and family. Housing grants were made available, providing stability to those who needed it most. But perhaps the most significant change was his own transformation. No longer content to sit in a distant boardroom, he committed himself to staying connected to his workforce. He began visiting his hotels regularly, not as the untouchable CEO escorted by a team of assistants, but as a curious, approachable leader. He walked the hallways, ate in the employee cafeterias, and spent time listening to the stories of his staff. He learned their names, their struggles, their dreams. In doing so, he found a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment that no balance sheet could ever provide. At his next executive meeting, he stood before his team and shared his vision. His voice was firm, but his words carried the weight of his new conviction. "Success isn't measured by the wealth we accumulate," he said. "It's measured, and it starts with us." His words resonated, not just as a mandate, but as a guiding principle that would shape the company's future. The millionaire had set out to understand his business from the ground up, but what he discovered was far more valuable: a deep respect for the extraordinary people who turned his vision into reality, and a commitment to ensuring that they were never overlooked again. As the city lights twinkled outside his window, he felt a quiet sense of contentment. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing the next big milestone or worrying about his legacy. He had found something far more enduring: the chance to build a community where success was shared and every life was given the dignity it deserved. For Maria, life had transformed in ways she had never dared to imagine. The cramped, modest apartment she and Lucas had called home for years, with its creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, was replaced by a bright, spacious house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating the cheerful yellow walls Maria had chosen herself. For the first time, she had a home that felt safe, secure, and truly hers. Lucas, her 8-year-old son, thrived in this new environment. His room was a wonderland, a place where his imagination could soar. Shelves overflowed with books about adventures and science, a desk sat ready for his homework and drawings, and a colorful rug sprawled across the floor where he built castles and played with his new toys. At night, he would curl up in his cozy bed with a smile on his face, his lungs clear and his health no longer a constant worry. Maria no longer had to choose between paying the rent and buying Lucas's inhaler. His medical treatments were fully covered now, and she didn't have to watch him struggle with his breathing, feeling helpless and afraid. The scholarship fund established in his name brought tears to her eyes every time she thought of it. She envisioned Lucas going to college one day, his future bright and filled with possibilities, a future she had once believed was out of reach. At the hotel, Maria remained the same hard-working, compassionate woman she had always been. She continued to greet every guest with genuine warmth and treated every coworker with kindness and respect. But now, things were different. Her colleagues looked at her with admiration, often going out of their way to remind her of the impact she had made. One afternoon, as Maria was organizing supplies in the staff corridor, a young trainee approached her hesitantly. The girl's cheeks were flushed and she fidgeted nervously with her hands. "Maria," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I didn't quit. When I spilled that tray on my first day, I thought I'd never recover. But you told me it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes. And now, I love it here, thank you." Maria's heart swelled with pride and emotion. She smiled, placing a gentle hand on the trainee's shoulder. "You're doing amazing," she said warmly. "Never forget that, and remember, kindness goes a long way. Pass it on when you can." Moments like these reminded Maria of the power of small acts of kindness. She had always believed in their importance, but now she understood how deeply they could ripple through the lives of others, creating waves of change that she might never fully see. At home, the transformation was equally profound. Lucas, who had once been quiet and reserved, now laughed freely and often. He raced home from school each day to share his adventures, his stories filled with excitement and joy. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table playing a board game, a new tradition they had started since moving into their new home, Lucas looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "You're happy, Mom," he said, his voice filled with the innocence of a child's observation. Maria paused, her hand hovering over the game piece she was about to move. She looked at her son, taking in the glow of his health, the sparkle in his eyes, and the warmth in his smile. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but it wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. pure and overwhelming. She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "I am, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And so are you. That's all I've ever wanted." That night, as she tucked Lucas into bed, she sat by his side for a moment longer than usual, running her fingers gently through his hair. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the struggles they had endured, and the kindness that had changed their lives. In the quiet of their new home, Maria smiled to herself, knowing that their story was only just beginning. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about tomorrow. Instead, she could focus on building a future filled with hope, love, and the belief that kindness, no matter how small, could truly change the world. The changes at the hotel didn't just transform Maria's life. They rippled outward, touching every corner of the workplace and beyond. What began as a single act of recognition grew into a culture of appreciation, where employees who had once felt invisible now felt valued, seen, and celebrated. Staff members walked into the hotel each day with renewed pride. The bellhop who had once dreamed of leaving now saw his job as a stepping stone, a place where he could grow. The front desk clerk, who used to dread the long hours, now greeted guests with genuine enthusiasm, her smile brighter than ever. In the kitchen, the chefs and cooks worked with a camaraderie they hadn't felt in years, their passion for their craft reignited. The changes weren't just surface-level improvements. They were deeply rooted in the way people felt about their work. Productivity soared, but what truly mattered was the shift in morale. The hotel became more than just a workplace. It became a family. Employees supported one another, celebrated each other's successes, and rallied together during challenges. It wasn't just about doing a job anymore. It was about being part of something bigger. As word of the transformation spread, other companies began to take notice. Articles were written in business journals, detailing how one millionaire's decision to connect with his employees had turned an ordinary hotel into a shining example of workplace harmony. Interviews were conducted with staff members, their stories of newfound hope and purpose inspiring readers across industries. Marie captured the world's attention. Her journey from an overlooked housekeeper to a symbol of resilience and kindness became a beacon of hope in an often cynical world. Conferences and seminars featured discussions about how small acts of recognition could create monumental change. CEOs began to reevaluate their own leadership styles, asking themselves how they could better serve the people who made their businesses thrive. Even in distant corners of the globe, people shared Maria's story online, drawing strength from her example. "If Maria can inspire change at her workplace," one commenter wrote, "what can I do to make a difference in my own?" But perhaps the most profound change was in the way guests experienced the hotel. It was no longer just a place of luxury. It became a sanctuary of warmth and connection. Guests began to notice the small details, the genuine pride with which the staff carried themselves, the extra care put into every interaction, the way employees worked together seamlessly like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Guests who had stayed at the hotel before commented on the transformation. "I don't know what's changed," one guest remarked to a front desk clerk, "but there's something special about this place now. You can feel it in the air." Another guest wrote in a glowing review, "This isn't just a hotel, it's a home. The staff here don't just serve you, they make you feel like you belong." The hotel became known not just for its luxury, but for the heart and soul infused into every aspect of its operations. Guests left with more than just memories of comfort and indulgence. They left with a renewed faith in humanity, inspired by the kindness and dedication of the people who worked there. This isn't just a story about a millionaire or a housekeeper. It's a story about all of us, about the power of seeing each other, of recognizing the extraordinary in the ordinary. Stories like Maria's remind us of the incredible power we all hold to impact the lives of others. Sometimes it's the smallest acts, a smile, a kind word, or a helping hand, that spark the greatest transformations. Now, we turn to you. Have you ever seen someone's kindness change a life? Maybe it was a teacher who believed in you, a stranger who helped you in a time of need, or a friend who stayed by your side when you felt lost. When you share your story in the comments below, let's create a ripple effect of inspiration by reminding each other of the goodness that exists in the world. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today. By sharing stories like these, we spread hope and remind others of the power we all have to make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting and heartwarming stories. Together, we can build a community that celebrates kindness, compassion, and the extraordinary in the ordinary. But most importantly, ask yourself this: what will you do today to make a difference? Maybe it's helping a coworker who's overwhelmed, reaching out to a friend you haven't spoken to in a while, or simply offering a smile to a stranger. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the potential to change a life. You have the power to be someone's light in the darkness. Remember, kindness doesn't just change lives, it transforms them. It starts with you.